It looks like we're live. Let's make sure. Check 1, 2. Might get a little bit of audio feedback during testing. Build starts at noon, which will be about 20 minutes from now. Oh, that sounds awful. That sounds awful. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Ooh, that was really bad. Let's see if we can fix that audio. Thanks, Windows. So, check 1, 2. Well, that should work. Check 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see if we have any audio options here. Something dropping. Windows. Oh, Windows. The joys of the Windows audio system. Sure how much microphone boost I want. Check 1, 2, 1, 2. Maybe a little bit more than that. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. That's probably okay. Right there. And let's see how that sounds. It should be better. Check 1, 2. 1, 2. Check 1, 2. I wonder if there's noise reduction in this. I still have 15 minutes to showtime. Just like work. Yeah, that's gonna get annoying. A copy of yourself. Let's see. There's a noise gate and there's noise suppression. So I'll call this one noise suppression. I know you all wanted to hear me learn how to use OBS at the beginning of the stream for 15 minutes or so, right? I'm afraid to use these filters and gates. I think suppression I trust. A gate, I don't know if it'll indicate on the slider. Would have been great if I would have tested this, right? I guess I could test it now, right? Yeah, see, I don't think that's gonna. Settings don't quite look right. 1632. But I'm sure that might work. Yeah, what the hell? Let's try it. Let's see how that sounds. Checking audio. Checking audio with noise suppression and gate on. Let's see how that sounds. Checking audio. Checking audio with noise suppression and gate on. That actually sounds really good, I think. Actually sounds really good. Check. 1, 2. Check. 1, 2. Alright, so I guess I just trust that it works. And we've got a few minutes left. I watch here and see if and when. Let me turn this way down because that's, I'm not sure why it does that. Wait, is that how it actually sounds? Not sure why it does that. Wait, is that how it actually sounds? Ooh, I have cable here. I will be right back. change really quickly. Alright. Last thing I had to do. So we're building the Louqe Ghost today. Nice little small form factor case. And the intended purpose is a home network attached storage. So the idea is for the person that's going to be using this, all their personal data goes right on this guy. There's going to be 2 SSDs, and eventually there will be redundancy. There isn't now, but there will be. It will be backed up to an offsite backup service. So we're not too worried about that yet. I'm kind of waiting to see how full the drive ends up getting before I decide on exactly what kind of redundancy setup to go with, if that makes sense. So if you have a lot of data, you're going to want some spinning hard drives in the mix somehow, more than likely. But SSDs have gotten to the point where their price for capacity has dropped enough, and both the way that they fail and how often they fail makes it kind of a no-brainer that you want to go with an SSD if you can for just about anything, not just an operating system drive, but if you have pictures, if you have home movies, and you want all that stuff backed up. An SSD, it's not that they last forever. Neither hard drives nor SSDs last forever, but when an SSD fails, it's unable to write new data to the SSD, typically. Whereas when a hard drive fails, you can't get your stuff off of it, which is a lot worse in most cases. One example where it could be worse that you can't write to a drive is if you have security cameras recording to a drive and you don't realize that it can't record anymore to it, and all of a sudden it's a problem. So, small rant. I'm not technically starting the build yet. I still have a minute. I'm going to copy some files on my phone because I downloaded. I want to maybe start the operating system install today, kind of at the end of the build if somebody wants to stay around and watch that. And so I've downloaded Ubuntu on my phone. This is kind of a roundabout way to install an operating system, but on a rooted phone, you can use your phone as a flash drive, a bootable flash drive. So I can download, like I have here, and then put it in just the right folder for a program called Drive Droid. I think it's on the market, or the Play Store. I think it's on the Google Play Store, but you do need to be rooted in order to use it, so keep that in mind. Paste here, Drive Droid images. How does it take time to move a file? What kind of awful operating system is that? No, whatever. It doesn't matter. So that'll be ready to go once we're ready to boot it. And that's noon, so I guess it's time for me to get started. Okay, so change the camera view here because you don't really need to see the build starts at noon thing. Sorry, everybody. I just realized that I forgot to. Sorry about that. I'm just realizing that I forgot to add audio to most of these. Check 1, 2. Yeah, sorry about that. Audio issues. I will start over. I forgot to add the. I had audio issues earlier. Changed to using my computer microphone and never changed the settings for all of my other scenes. So that explains what happened there. I will take one quick second and re-add these. So brief intermission. Audio input capture. So yes, if you're using OBS and you suddenly at the last minute decide to change your audio inputs, make sure you do it for all of your scenes, not just one of them. Audio input capture. Of course, I don't know if I did, there were some noise filters that I added, which may not get added. Your mission. Actually, you know what? I can talk while I'm doing this. So, what we went over was, and I don't honestly remember exactly where it stopped, but Louqe ghost case, small, milled aluminum. Oh, that's not supposed to come out like that. That's okay. And if I pop the top off, you'll see there's a lot of things I like about this case. Number one, it's small. Number two, you have room for a PCI Express. You have room for a graphics card. We're not doing one today. I kind of have one that I'm going to throw in to do the install, but that will be for more SSDs. Also have room for a power supply. A lot of these really small cases, like you know, the Intel NUC and a lot of the other the Mac Mini. Well, the Mac Mini I think has a built-in power supply, but a lot of the small form factor cases tend to have external power supplies. So you'll have like a power brick that has to go somewhere, and people don't generally like that. So I like this because it's nice, it's small, and everything's built in, so it's not, you know, a big cable mess. Almost done. I built a lot of scenes for this. Build starts at noon. Go away. Yes. I know, it looks like I'm doing nothing. So the next thing we went over was the CPU. Let's see if we can get her to focus. AMD Ryzen 7 3800. So that's an 8-core, 16-thread. That's that hyper-threading or symmetrical multi-threading. 4.5 gigahertz max boost, 3.9 gigahertz base frequency. So the idea there is similar to a lot of server CPUs. If you can throw more CPU cores at a problem rather than clocking up the cores that you have. So let's say you can do a job one of two ways. You can do it at 4 gigahertz with 4 cores, or you could do it at 2 gigahertz with 8 cores. You will save more power doing it at the slower speed using more cores. So that's most of my inputs. The webcam only input, I have to re-add that. The next we had was the rip jaws. the memory. So this is, I know you're not going to be able to read that, and they should really put it on the box somewhere other than just on the little sticker on the memory. We have 32 gigabytes of DDR4 3600 speed memory in two 16 gig sticks. The reason behind using two sticks, so in the case of this motherboard, we only have two memory slots, but we have what's called a dual channel memory controller. So anytime you have a multi-channel memory controller, and pretty much everything has at least two channels, if not more, you want to fill those, because if you don't, you're missing out on a lot of the bandwidth. So what I mean by that is going from two channels, like we have on this board, to something with four channels like I have on my personal machine, you basically get twice the speed of reads and writes to and from memory. But you don't get that if you don't add that many sticks of memory. So if we had just put one stick of memory in this machine, we'd be cutting our memory bandwidth in half, even though we are kind of tying our hands in terms of upgrades, because now if we want to upgrade, we're actually going to have to replace the memory and not just add to it. That should make sense when we get to the actual building, but that's the general idea. Alright, and that is the last scene with the audio re-added. So we should be good there. Let me check and see. Okay, I lost my sound. I think I have it now. Sound is fixed. One quick second. Okay, so we went over the case a little bit. We'll dig deeper into that in a minute. We went over the CPU, the memory, the cooler. I think I went over. I don't remember if it was after I cut out my audio or not. But so here's the cooler. It's nice. It's slim, especially with the fan mounted on the bottom. You can mount it on the top. And I want to say there's some cooling advantage to that, but we aren't going to have room for that today. So yeah, we'll move that over for now. This will get bent a little bit because it actually, you'll see when we get to the inside, it doesn't quite clear the case, but just about, and we can bend these little heat pipes here. Yeah, so if we bend, basically just smush it down just a little bit. Once those screws and the cardboard are away, that'll be a little easier. Try not to bend these fins if you're playing around with it. That's bad. So I'm going to move this guy over a little bit because I need a little bit of room to show off the motherboard. Before I do that, I'm going to do the other two bits because they're kind of small and it's easy to get through. And my exposure is not great here, I guess. But so we've got two of these guys, Rocket Q NVMe SSDs, 2 terabytes. So we're going to be running these in RAID 0, which puts the two of their capacities together, and you also get double the reads and write speed. So essentially every operation that it does, whether it's reading or writing, it splits it across the two drives for better performance. So we'll put those to the side. Nice thing about those two, they consume very little heat. They when an SSD fails, it becomes unable to write new data, which means that you don't lose your data like you do with a hard drive when a hard drive dies and you just can't read your stuff anymore. So now we'll get to the motherboard. And these are kind of cool. small form factor ITX motherboards in general. So this is essentially the whole computer. If you didn't need the power supply, which I should go over, I mean it's a power supply, right? People have seen power supplies. This one is a little bit special. It's an 80 plus platinum, which I think is the highest level. I don't remember. There's platinum and there's titanium, and I don't remember where they fall. This may have just been what was available, but a good power efficient, and in this case both small and modular. You can see the plugs here. So we aren't going to have a bunch of extra cables hanging out inside the case, you know, blocking airflow. My goal is that this thing, with all of its vents on both the top and the sides, right, and most importantly the bottom, which is raised, you know, you can see those little feet, right? So this sits up off of the desk, not sitting on the desk. It has an open bottom, and ideally, as the machine heats up, it will just kind of waft off and up through the grates, and you won't actually need a cooling fan. They also make, for this case, they make top hats, so there are other pieces that go up. So we went over the power supply. Let's back out of the way. Oh my God, anti-static! Don't worry, I left my wrist strap in another state, so it's fine. So on the back, you can see the rear I/O. You've got a decent sound card, which is kind of goofy. So they actually have it on this separate riser card. This isn't something that you normally see on a typical motherboard. Normally this would be part of the board. They've done this to keep it, you know, short. And then they've also got an M.2 slot there, so that's where we'll be putting one of our SSDs that'll go under there. But as far as the rear I/O goes, we've got that audio. We've got 802.11ax Wi-Fi. I recommend putting any kind of high traffic device on Ethernet anytime you can. I mean, really any device, but it's there. 1 gig Ethernet be nicer if it was better, but it's a small form factor, and it wasn't all that expensive, so I don't really expect more than that. Got a bunch of USB, a few, you know, USB 3s, a few USB 3.2s, and then you also have a USB-C, an HDMI, and DisplayPort. Now those ports are not actually going to work on this, because those are for if you happen to buy a CPU that has a graphics card built into it, which at least right now they don't have one that is 7 nanometers like this CPU is, which means it wouldn't be as efficient. You wouldn't get as much power out of it in terms of computing. You'd kind of give that up to have a graphics card built in. In this case, nobody's going to be sitting at this. It's going to be managed over the network, so we're not going to have a graphics card. I have one here to kind of help with the setup. So this is actually out of my machine. This is just so that I can get an operating system installed on it and get it to get an IP address, and then from there on out, I'll be managing it over the network. So, might as well get to the fun stuff, right? Let's actually put it together. And I'll try and make this stuff faster and kind of use it as an opportunity for explaining while I do things like try and fight with the cardboard box that I know I opened yesterday just to make sure that they weren't like sealed and whatnot. Yeah, this is going to be the hard part. All right. Oh my God. Is there a sticker? I mean, I need a sticker for the front of my case. Honestly, I'm not sure why they put these stickers on there, since it kind of, I'm going to change this exposure. They're insulators. So on a lot of these motherboards, you'll see there will be a heat sink to transfer the heat away from the SSD, and then you go ahead and there's actually a thermal pad, which I'm going to show you in a minute, that's designed to help take the heat away while this is running. But then they put a sticker on it, which is an insulator. It also looks like it almost might be backed by a strip of copper, which would be interesting, because then you would have a strip of copper, which is an awesome conductor, going onto a sticker, which is an awful conductor, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I'm going to take these screws off. As I showed you before, that's the audio card, and if you look, you should be able to see, if I can be a better cameraman from this side than I am on that side. Those two screws there, so this plate here will come off. And that'll reveal our M.2 slot, and then I will have to go and dig for a screw, which I know is in the motherboard box. Be careful with all those screws and whatnot. I mean, not that you can't get them again, but you probably don't want to be running out to the store to... Well, that's interesting. Oh, so this is kind of cool. Well, number one, don't drop that. So remember I said there's a heat spreader on there, right? That's meant to cool it down. So that's that. Come on. Yeah, so that's that. You peel that off and that comes off. But what's more interesting to me is, see those? Those little pins? First thought was, is this a temperature sensor? Is it a, there's no fan on it. But what I think it is RGB. I think this lights up. I'm pretty sure it lights up. So that's kind of how that works. If you're putting together a computer and you're curious because you're like, hey, I took off this heatsink and it's got a bunch of pins on it. Am I supposed to do something? No, just put it back where it came from. You'll see there's here, I can show you the M.2 slot now. So this is where your SSD goes, right? And you can see there's the pin headers. Yeah, right there on the edge of it, right about there. So that's where that plugs in. This is your actual M.2 slot, and then that will be the screw that we're going to use to hold it down, more than likely. I think. Actually, no, let's see. Oh, I lied. They actually did leave us a screw, so I don't have to go digging through the motherboard. So you'll see this installation is really, really easy. And I love these drives because they take up no space. So we're going to slide this in here. I'm not going to do it quite yet, but you see how that kind of just slid in there, and you can see the contacts are buried. And now there's that screw that I'll need to take out and then put back down, and I'll do that now. You do want to be careful though, because if you look, remember when I lied to you all and said we were going to use that screw to screw it in? So there's sometimes you have to move these around. Sometimes they unscrew and you actually have to move it from one spot to the other. But you'll see here as kind of the default, if I turn the angle, because of the heights that they're at, they don't interfere with each other. In fact, this one has this little rubber piece to kind of keep it off and keep it from shorting. And then this one down here is even lower. So it's something to be aware of. Most of them tend to be, they have different sizes on them. So you'll see this one says 2280, if that'll ever focus. Come on. Come on. I know if I make it move. Well, there we go. Yeah, I don't know if you can read that. It's smaller on my screen than it'll be on yours. So M2280, so that's essentially the size. They have different sizes. I don't typically see the smaller sizes. I have seen, I think somebody makes a bigger size, but they're not as common. And when you're doing this, especially if you're doing it for someone else, but even if you're doing it for yourself, make sure the tip of the screwdriver is actually the right size for the screw. Phillips screws are awful in general. This uses torque screws, which I like because they're not in the shape of a ramp like a Phillips screw is, so it doesn't constantly slip. So we're going to take that screw out. I should start moving faster because we're already halfway through my planned hour. I don't know if I get that 10 minutes back that I had the audio problem. So we're going to screw this guy down. One thing I did want to mention about these kinds, so you can see now I keep forgetting the angle of the camera. So you can see the screws in there. Screws in there. It's in the slot. It's you don't see any of those contacts showing. They're all in that little slot, which is keyed, by the way. If you didn't see that before, it's gonna struggle because it's way too close. But you can kind of see, yeah, there's a little notch in the drive. I'll show you in the next one. So you can't put it in the wrong way. And then if you have these, and not all motherboards do, or some have them for some slots but not for others, which kind of makes you question how necessary they are, you peel this off. It's a sticker. And the pad seems to want to come with it, which, again, how well thought out was this? So that's your thermal pad, the idea being that this is a good conductor and it's going to mush down on top of this guy and pull it onto this big metal bit here that has a fan in it. So this has a fan, if you can't see it. Now, I like to show people things upside down. It's fun for me. So this whole thing kind of becomes one big heat sink, right? And there's a fan in there. There's a fan right in there. Right about there. So that guy will cool off a number of things, including the SSD, because they're touching the metal, and that's how things get cool. I'm going to drop this guy in to help me position that so that I know that those plugs, like I mentioned before, right, those little pins, so those are lined up. You want them to be, plugging right in. You don't want to be bending them, and if they bend, you can bend them back, and then if you can't bend them back, then you can call me, but I prefer none of that happens. See, that's why I leave the plastic on until I'm finished. There's a top tip. Don't take the plastic off until you're done with the screwdriver. I mean, that wouldn't have scratched it, but still good advice, though. There we go. Anyway, you can see a little better. Should I check and make sure there's nothing in the chat telling me that I screwed up again? Okay, so first SSD is installed. I tighten that down a little bit more. I don't think, I'm not going to lie, that is bowing a little bit. But, I mean, there's, you can see it. I think that's just kind of the way it is because that's the way the PCB is. But there's clearly a standoff back here that determines the height here. And then there's this bit that determines the height there. And it's just kind of pushing down on it. Just a little bit more. I'd like it to, but I think that's the way it is. I'm not gonna loosen it up, because that would be. So I may revisit that. We'll see. I might switch those two screws and or bolts around, if that makes sense. So on the back of the motherboard here, you'll notice one thing is this big metal, Republic of Gamers heatsink here, and then over here we have another M.2 slot. Right, it's almost kind of hidden, especially if I'm awful at this camera work from reverse. But you can see, right, we've got the stand, we've got, actually those aren't standoffs, those are just threaded holes. So I think I am going to have to get the motherboard box again for this, so that we can get the standoff for the right length of SSD that we have. Which is nearby for sure. Oh yeah, it's right here. Keep your motherboard box, even if you don't use a cable or whatnot, keep it nearby. IO shield, we're going to want that for the back. I don't know why those don't come pre-installed. I think someone might have a patent on it, but I'm not entirely sure. This is nice too. They give you, let's see, those are two different sizes. We'll see which screw is for which. This guy is for something else entirely. This guy is for something else entirely. Sorry, that's probably not good to hold the cardboard box in your face. You got your Wi-Fi antenna. That one, I'm actually going to see if I can put it on the inside, just to make it neater. And I'm not sure what effect aluminum has on RF. I know if it were steel, there would be a no-no, but it's aluminum, so I should check the manual for this, in theory. But I feel like the last time I did that, it wasn't clear either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the SSD. I'm going to kind of push it down and see what looks like the right height. I think it's the smaller one. That would make sense to me because you've got so little space back here between the board and the case itself. Here, just so you can see. So they include two different size standoffs. If you can see that. So one's real little and one's kind of little. One's bigger than the other. And I think I want to use the real short one because it's supposed to be closer to the board because it's on the back side of the board, which is just kind of common sense. I went through this trying to figure out on my when I got the machine I built for myself recently, and I couldn't really find a spot in the manual where they really specified. Like they didn't mention the number on the bag or anything like that to tell you exactly which one to use. So that was just kind of annoying. So this guy will go in here like before. Remember I said there was a little key. Come on. Come on. There we go. Come on. There we go. Yeah, see, so you can only put it in one way. Usually the side with the stuff on it is going to face upwards. So I'm going to push this down and just kind of look at the gap between it and the board and see what would make sense to put there. And I think yeah, it's going to be the shorter of these two, because the other one would be ridiculous in terms of height. So that's how you figure things out without a manual. You shouldn't do that for everything. Some things the manual is awful for. So move this stuff out of the way. So I'm sure you guys don't want to look at a bunch of random stuff either. So I took the little one out of the bag. So I'm going to screw this guy in. And now you can see when we put it in, it's going to line up with that upper hole rather than the lower. So take this guy. And I'm hoping, for the sake of simplicity, that that's exactly the same size as the end of my screwdriver, and I'm guessing that it is. Come on. Oh, really? I thought I had. I mean, really, you don't have to come through I do. I do have a bit for that. So I can toss that. That's garbage. Toss this. That's garbage. And I'm not even going to really get a tool. I'm just going to tame with my hand. I just want to make sure it doesn't come out. That's all. You're not trying to crack the internal layers of the PCB when you screw it down. Just don't want it to come loose. And it probably isn't going to be riding along in a truck for the next 20 years, so you probably don't have to wrench down on it that hard. So we're going to put the screw in, and everything looks like it lines up. And you can tell I grabbed the right height because it's all, whoops, can you see that little gap there? Right, it's all parallel. So next up, we're going to grab, it's going to be a combination of two things. So we have to put the cooler on and the memory, and there is some discussion about whether or not that fits. So we're going to find out together. That'll be fun. I mean, I know it can fit. I think the issue in question is whether or not the question is whether or not these heatsink fins are going to hit the CPU cooler, the fan. You know, I'm going to change my camera angle because that'll probably make me less likely to cut off the things that I'm trying to show people. Did I lose that again? Did I lose my mouse again? There she goes. There we go. That's all you need to see. That's better. I am not the focus. Additionally, and I didn't mention this yet, for our cooler, we need to take off these brackets. Some coolers and fans and whatnot use these brackets, but many of them don't. These little brackets to mount the seat, they're like little hooks. They're plastic. So we're going to unscrew those and pull those off. I keep forgetting where I aimed the camera. Why don't I just re-aim the camera? It'll be easier, huh? Chasing it. Then I can just kind of where I want to work, and then there we go. Move it out of the way. Now we'll bring this closer, and that should be easier to see anyways. I just didn't want to have to re-aim the stupid webcam. So back to taking these screws off. And this is also, we can put the brackets on that come with the fan. And there is a manual for that. And I'll look at it again. This may not be its final form. I may not put the sides on it by the time we finish, just for the sake of time. But we will at least get it to boot, and you'll see that. So, This will probably be time to look at a manual, because playing detective on these kinds of things is not always fun. I did cheat a little bit. I looked yesterday. Yeah, this is difficult to read. So basically, I have a number of these parts and brackets, and some are for some processors and some are for other processors. I'm going to get the plastic ones out of the way because we know they're not being used. I'm going to move this guy out of the way because I know I'm not going to need one of those bits again for a while. So we're kind of trying to figure out which one of these we should use for which scenario. So we know what CPU we have, so these are the instructions for AMD, and I know I use gray spacers and these included screws for the instructions. I'm just now trying to figure out they list two orientations and it's confusing because they don't make it clear which way is up. I think up is, so up is what? Up is that way? Huh. Yeah, maybe you can figure it out. I don't know. I am going to grab the cooler and try and use some common sense and figure out where I want. I guess it's just about whether you want the okay, so those spacers go there. Whether you want the bars to go like this, because it's going to be one of these two bars, right? So it's whether you want the bars to go like that, or whether you want the bars to go like this. I don't think I want the bars to go like that, because I don't know that there's room to go like that. So I think I want the bars to go like this. Whoop. Right? Makes sense? Probably. We'll see. I could probably look at a picture of somebody who's done this already, but I mean, if I do it wrong, I just take it apart and do it again. Alright, so manual says gray spacers for AM4 socket. A lot of coolers will work for a lot of different processors, not just yours. So make sure you follow the instructions for the one that is yours, because they will be different. So we have different heights and things like that. So let's see if we compare these two. I don't know how well you can see that, but they are two slightly, yeah, that's almost impossible to see. Let's see. I'm going to do better. They are two different heights. Slightly. Not by much, but slightly. Oh God, please don't. Boy, else be nice. The dog's about to leave. Oh, please. Could you please not do that? I'm going to sell you to the circus. Yes, I am. I'm going to sell you to the circus. Hey. It's fine. Hey. she'll tire herself out. Anyways, manual also said use hole number 4, and if you look there, you'll see there's a number 4 on the 2 outer screw holes. You're gonna go in your bed. Hang on one second. Just the threat of it is usually enough. She doesn't want to go in her bed. She wants to be out here where she can watch all the stuff going on. Alright, so we're going to put the spacers on the motherboard. Those are going to go under the bracket because you don't want metal touching your motherboard in general. We're going to put the screws through hole number 4. And we're going to screw those down where we took the other screws out of for the plastic hold down that comes with it. And make sure you get this in the right actual thread, because you don't want to be like, well, you shouldn't have to force it at all. If you're trying to force it, you're doing it wrong, because these threads are very clean, they're brand new, and very easy to go into. You can see I'm barely touching the screwdriver. I mean, you can tighten them down a little bit once they're down, but you shouldn't have to very much. Okay, you're not trying to crack the motherboard in half. You do want it a little bit tight, just so that it doesn't, like, the fan will spin and the fan itself will vibrate a little bit, more so than other screws on the board, but still, don't crack things. Don't too crack. And these are supposed to bend inwards towards the CPU socket. Notice I'm doing all of the screwdrivering I can before I put in the expensive parts, like the processor and the memory. Do that. Do that. I'm hoping that the CPU fans aren't barking into my really awful microphone that's built into the machine. I probably shouldn't admit all that, but there you go. I apologize for my awful audio setup. I'm a video guy. So, those are installed. We got the SSD on the back, SSD on the front. Next, I think, is the CPU. One thing I haven't talked about yet is testing your motherboard outside the case, which is usually recommended, and I wasn't going to do because it's, to me, it's kind of like making Cat 5 cables. I feel good enough about it that I'm not worried about building out, outside the case first. But especially if it's your first time or you haven't done it in a while, the box that the motherboard came in is what everyone tends to use, so that's what we'll use for our testing. And for that testing, we're going to need a few things to install. So number 1 is going to be the CPU. So we're going to pull that guy out of here. And this did come with a stock cooler. Unfortunately, it's also really big. I'm not going to pull it out, but you can kind of get the idea of how big it is. So we can't use that one because it's too big. And here's the CPU. And you've got a sticker if you like to be a sticker whore. You like to, provide free advertising to people. You're welcome to do that. These particular AMD CPUs are pin grid array, which means that in that socket you will see a bunch of holes, right? Those aren't pins, those are holes. And you'll also have this little retention mechanism that kind of comes up. And I don't know that you can see it all that well, but when I push it down, Let's see if we can get it real closer. So when I push it down, it's going to rock this whole thing back and forth, and that lets you, it's called zero insertion force socket. So that's how you install it. There is a notch, usually. I thought they had a notch. I think it's up here, because you can see the other, there's a right way to install it, right? And if you look up here in the corner, or maybe you can't see it, there is a, all of these are kind of angled edges, right? Like there's pins that go at a perfect diagonal angle, and then up here in this corner, that one diagonal pin is missing. So that, I believe, is our, oh, and you can actually see, if you look really closely at the motherboard itself, there's like a little white, there's like a little white mark there on the board itself, like it's printed on there, and that little arrow. So we're going to line that up with the same arrow you're going to see on the CPU. Yeah, so you can see it even before I take it out of the packaging. You'll see a little gold triangle up in that corner up there, and it's also on the back side. So if you look at the back side, whoop, you see the little gold triangle up in the corner, that top left. So we're going to line that up with the, and be very careful not to bend any of these pins. If you do bend one, it can be bent back, usually, if you aren't a monster and you don't destroy it in the process. But you can see that kind of just dropped right in. I didn't have to push on it, I didn't have to mess with it. It is rocking just a touch. So I do kind of want to take a look. Actually, that makes sense. So there are these little, you can kind of see them there. There's little holes, right? There's like 4 spots where there aren't pins. There's actually a little raised feet on there that kind of match up with them, which explains the rocking feeling I was having, and the fact that, you know, these are plastic parts, so they're not 100% perfect either. But make sure you get the triangle lined up. If you don't, it will want to likely sit up on a corner, and if you force it down when it's trying to sit up, then bad things happen and stuff gets broken. So that's that retention mechanism I was talking about earlier, right? So this has to be up for you to put the CPU inside. So it's up, and the chip will drop down, and you won't have to push on it. And then once it's in, you just move that thing forward. And there's actually a little hook on the bottom that you see that? I move. And you kind of see, it's hard to do without my finger in there. See how it kind of moved out, and underneath this little, there's a little plastic thing down there. So now that's held in place, and that won't go anywhere. Next, I'm going to do the memory. These are easy peasy. I'll keep it family friendly, and I won't finish that one. So we got our memory. This is easy enough. These are also keyed, but it's not always obvious. And what I mean by that is that they're not symmetrical. There we go. So as you can see, there is a notch in these, and it's not quite at the center, right? So you can only put it in one way, it's just not incredibly obvious. And different motherboards have different latching mechanisms. It used to be that you had a latch on both sides, On this one, you just kind of have the latch on the one side. I'm going to adjust the exposure just a little bit because I adjusted it down earlier and I think that was wrong. I'll adjust the aperture a little too, things in focus a little better. Okay. So you can see there's some latches here, right? So you rock these latches back and forth. The other side does not have latches. So those are just kind of in there, and it's interesting. They're spring loaded on the other side, which makes you wonder. I think they mostly use these as ejectors at this point, because on the other side you have these little metal springs. I think you can see them in there that just kind of hold on to these notches in the sides of the memory modules. So we'll pop these guys in. Like I said before, if you have a dual channel memory controller, you should be using at least 2 sticks, regardless of how many slots you have. And if you have a quad channel memory controller, you should be using at least 4 sticks, and you should add them in multiples of that. So, you know, if you start out with 4 sticks, you should not add 2, you should add 4 after that. One more stick. Oh, look, we're in an hour already. Yeah, I guess that was a bit of a pipe dream. It goes a lot faster without explaining it, and without audio issues. So same deal. We're just going to kind of slide this down into the slot, make sure it's lined up, and make sure that that center bit is in the right place. And if you don't have to push that hard. Like I'm going to push. Actually, I kind of lied there. I actually did have to push a little bit hard. Don't push too hard. How hard is too hard? I don't know. That question is hard. One way or another, we can at least get to a tested system, and then people that are bored can disappear if they'd like. Now, how in the... If I was smart, I would have read the directions in advance. Because right now, I'm slightly confused as to how a screw threads into a screw. Do this thing, then do this thing, then... Well, that's confusing. So, have... Those aren't screws, those are studs. I mean, oh! Those are female screws. Or, I guess I don't know what you would call them. So that's slightly confusing. These, they look like the threads that the screw would come down from, but they're not. They're actually like female threaded screws, which is interesting. I haven't seen that before, but I can't complain about it. It is not a bad design. Oh wow, I didn't even realize that they give you a little long screwdriver for installing this guy. So I need thermal paste, and the purpose of this stuff is really just to take up the little gaps when you, because this is not perfectly smooth. It's pretty smooth, but it's not perfectly smooth. The CPU is also not perfectly smooth because it has writing on it, and because they're not gonna, they're not gonna perfectly polish the surfaces of CPUs. The benefits just don't make sense. So what we do is we use this thermal paste stuff, and the idea is that when you smush it down, it helps conduct some of that heat away. So different people do different patterns. What's important is that you get enough on there and that it is not horribly uneven. You want to get it on all of the CPU. And it will probably smush out, hopefully not too much. So that's just how I'm going to do it today. There have been people that have tested all these different patterns and stuff, and the answer was it doesn't matter, and also you can more than likely take it off and put it back on again and it still doesn't matter. I think I'm going to take this fan off just because I can and because I don't want it to be not. It might be a pain to get back on. So let's do a quick sanity check and make sure everything is going to fit the way I think it's going to. Ooh, that is tight. In fact, now I'm wondering if I should use the other. So I kind of anticipated some of this, but we are having some interference issues with the memory, but also some interference issues over here. But I think, and for this part, I'm going to want to take a look at the inside of the case and figure out. This is kind of the fun stuff, the stuff that might turn an hour-long stream into a 4-hour-long stream, but figuring out how to fit like the absolute maximum amount of computing you can into this tiny little thing. I know I said we're not putting it in here immediately because we're going to want to test it first, but I still want to put the fan on in the way that it's going to stay. So I may have to unscrew this guy from the bottom. I think that may be a thing. And do I have a... Oh, it did come, yeah. So this case does come with a tool, and I'm going to use that tool only because it came with it, and even though I have another tool that I could use, at least I know there's variances in tools, right? So you buy one T5 screwdriver and you have one T5 screw and maybe they're loose. And then you get another one and that one's not loose. So at least this way I know that they at least sort of intended you to use this screwdriver with this case and its screws. So, yeah, I forgot. My only good camera's over there. This one's awful. I didn't want to lose the side panel and have it get scratched. Which reminds me, I should remove everything metal off of this table that doesn't need to be here. And these LEDs. There we go. And this G-Skill sticker. Marketing, marketing, marketing. Nice. Machined aluminum. So now I'm just kind of trying to figure out what my layout is going to look like once this is all in here. By the way, if you were wondering what the heck this thing is, it is called a riser cable. So the idea is that because space is limited and you want a full-size graphics card, you put your full-size graphics card down in there, and then this extension cable runs up to where our motherboard is going to sit. And then this all sits on the desk like that. So now I want to see how much clearance I have in different directions so that I know kind of which way I'm going to do this. In fact, I may just build this thing in the case. I'm trying to teach people the right way to do it if they haven't done it before, but I may just go ahead and put this in the case because it's going to make more sense for me trying to mount the thing. I think. Let's see how it goes. Okay. So this is going to be a tight fit, and so I want to get kind of an idea of what if I do this? Now, I don't even know that matters because I mean, that does appear to fit, or like it would fit. Those heat spreaders may have to come off. That may be what it comes down to. We'll figure it out. I may have to go out to the interwebs to see. Yeah, that's not great. Because if you see, if I put this on, it kind of wants to hit on a lot of things, including the top of that memory. I'm trying to avoid moving this around because it's aluminum and delicate. And also motherboards in it. So, yeah, the memory. I'm taking this out of here. I'm taking this out of here. I will give you a built computer today, even if I do have to look at that later. Do I just take that off? Yeah, I have to figure out how to resolve. Actually, I know what I'll do. Maybe I will save that for later, but get this running by just flipping the fan, because you can do that with this this cooler. Is you can flip the fan to be on the other side, which would give us more room for stuff. So let's see if I can get this. And to do that, I'm just going to pull these little tangs outward. I might want to get a flathead to kind of pull it away. Oh, there we go. Whoa! I don't know if you saw how that came off. But it'll go on the other side kind of the same way. I know I could make that memory work if I took the heat spreader off, but I want to do more reading before I go doing that, or not, or getting different heat sinks that fit, or what have you. So, actually, you know what? I might just do it. You can always put them back on. I mean, it's not like you ruin them. And we will go this way with it. the airflow is usually indicated by these little arrows on the side, if you can see those. And if you can't, then you'll just have to take my word for it. I'm just trying to catch some glare. Yeah. I know I saw him just a moment ago, which means you should have seen him. Whatever, there's arrows on it. So I'm going to put these back on this other side. I'm going to try not to touch the thermal paste so I don't get it all over the place. And then these just kind of hook inside. And then I would guess they pull, they hook around. I think they hook around like this. And then something like that. Right? Huh. Maybe not. Maybe. Oh, I see what it is. I think. So they kind of. I'd like to explain it, but you'll see what I mean if you end up with one of these fans. They kind of hook into the ridges there, and don't pay any attention to the orientation because at this point I'm just trying to get a system to boot so that I have something to show you as far as how to build a computer, as far as how to pack this in. We'll see. I might take that memory off. We'll see. Or the heat spreader for it, which is one of those things of debatable value, whether or not you need a heatsink on your memory, because most laptops do not have a heatsink on their memory. Although I don't think they're DDR4 either in most cases. So maybe that's a bad example. But many people argue the necessity of heatsink on memory. So we flipped the fan, and now I should be able to at least install this thing. Let's try it this direction. And so heat pipes are going to hit that direction, and then if I go the other direction, it's still going to hit the memory, which means I need to use that other bracket so that the pipes themselves are not going to collide with things. You know what? Nah, I'll put the other brackets on it. I'll put the other brackets on it. This may not be the final form. I did mean to look at how other people mounted this exact fan the other day, and I do remember that there was some discussion about memory height. I can't remember, because I know I looked into it. I knew it would be a tight fit. Now I'm trying to remember, did I change my mind on the memory after the fact, or did I know that it would fit if I did a certain thing? Or if I just thought, screw it, I'll remove the heat spreader. Oh shoot, I lost a camera. Be right back. The SLR died. Am I back? It should be. Hopefully. Fingers crossed. Hey, there it is. Well, there's one battery for the day. So we'll see how far we get on the next one. We'll grab these brackets again. The ones that kind of go the other ways. Alright, so we're going to try the mounting method number 2 because number 1 didn't work. Actually, I'm not sure which number is which. I'll try and keep my head in the webcam stream. Or, better yet, check out that sweet pan action. Yeah, so I mentioned before that this is not going to have a graphics card, and most people would think that's just because we're trying to save money, which is not the case. The real reason it doesn't have a graphics card is because this is a storage machine, and storage machines should have lots of storage. So, by skipping the graphics card, I still have a 16x PCI Express card slot and bandwidth and all that good stuff to play with. Gigabyte and potentially others make a card, a PCI Express card, that allows you to plug in a I'll go back to the other camera view. That allows you to, oh, where's my audio still there? I don't trust it now. There it is. That allows you to use one 16x PCI Express card slot to get 4 NVMe M.2 slots. So in theory, I could toss 4 more of those SSDs in here, and I'd be all set. For a ton of storage. Again, this is for a non-technical person, so it was more important for the project to have opportunities to make changes and expansions without, throwing out all the work that's already been done. Was kind of the mentality there. So I think this is going to fit. I'm pretty sure. I'm sorry that you can't see this, but I'll show you when I'm finished. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that fits. It fits and sits. It does both. If it fits, it sits. If it fits, it sits. Come on. I can't tell if I'm grabbing threads or not. Double check here. No, I wasn't, but I can be. Are you grabbing threads? I'm not, but I could be. On a wing and a prayer. I don't even know what that expression comes from. On a wing and a prayer. It's probably something stupid. Most expressions tend to be. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Why? Did you think people weren't going to notice if you threw your baby out just because you, drowned in the tub first? That doesn't make much sense. I don't get that. Who would do that? What kind of a monster? Throw a baby out with bathwater. Throw him out with the trash like a real man. No, just kidding. Don't do that. This isn't an instructional video on that. This is just about building computers. Everything else you are on your own for. Taking no responsibility. I don't know why I can't screw this down. I'm going to do it on my lap because it's easier. That's what she said. Yep. Because by all metrics, I should be threadable and able to tighten things down. I think it's because I'm not pushing on it, because they are spring-loaded. So, I'm going to push hard on the screw. I'm going to screw it real hard. I'm going to screw it real hard. I did it. See, that's what it takes sometimes. Yeah. You don't want to, because you don't want to be too rough, but sometimes they like it like that. Yeah. I think I tightened the one down too much. Now I can't get the other one at all. If I didn't show you before, there are these holes in the fins. I'm not just stabbing through the fan right now. So they're designed for this so that you can actually like tighten the screws on those little brackets. Yeah, I think I'm going to finish this build by myself without an audience for the memory fitment thing. But you'll still get to see how to build a computer. You're just not going to get to see how to perfectly fit something that doesn't want to. It doesn't want to be fit. You can't tame something that don't want to be tamed. Or something like that. I don't know. America. Freedom. That is being difficult. Loosen that one up again just a little bit. I think it's got to do with the angle and it moving and a number of other things. So pushing hard. Something's beeping. Who's beeping? There we go. That's in now. We've got it threaded. So now I can tighten down these screws. They're under spring tension. And I don't know if it's too much tension or too little tension. I'm going to check the manual one more time. Usually with these things, the spring is designed so that even if you bottom it out, gently tighten the screws until they stop, but don't use excessive force. That is, and they list a Newton meter measurement. Most people doing this are not going to have a Newton meter. Torque wrench, especially something down that low, but they say tighten it till it stops, which I imagine is, well, it's the bottom. You want to do this evenly. Let me clean some of this junk out of the way since we're not going to be using these brackets, at least not for now, for this build. Fan and CPU and all kinds of these screws from the old bracket. You can go away. Right, so those can go away. And we'll tighten these guys down so you can kind of see what I'm doing. There's holes in these fins, and those go down to those female threaded screws there, which tighten down on the brackets that we installed earlier. Where I started with one bracket and then we ended up with a different bracket. What I'm trying to do now is tighten them down evenly until those nuts, or screws, whatever you want to call them, until they kind of seat flush with that bracket, and then the springs are actually what keep tension. There is like measured, like there's supposed to be X number of pounds of force on these things. So yeah, there's that. So that's good. We've got a CPU, we've got a CPU fan, we've got memory, And we've got a cardboard box as a case. So this should be fun. Yeah, I will have to revisit that and probably end up ripping off the memory heat spreader. But I don't want to do that until I have done some reading to make sure that they absolutely do not need it, even at 3600. Put these little screws to the side. Make sure I don't lose them for the case. For the Louqe Ghost case. I guess the guy's Swedish. Like the fish. Now we're going to grab our power supply. We are almost to test time. That's going to be fun. We are getting very close. I know I said an hour and that was a lie. That was an awful, horribly optimistic lie. But I won't keep you too much longer. This is actually worth having a sticker for. So remember when I said that this thing will be quiet and cool and all that stuff? It actually says silent operation at low to moderate loads. In this mode, the fan will not spin. This is completely normal. This is not something to go to the store and complain and return it about. This is a feature that you paid for. That it's smart enough to know when it doesn't need the fan and just not run it. And just be nice and quiet. And look how tiny that is. Look how big that is. That's great. That does 450 watts. That little guy. At pretty high efficiency. I think there's a titanium above the platinum, but I don't actually remember. 80 plus titanium or 80 plus platinum. And they give you a couple little cable ties. And because it's a modular power supply, you got these cables. Is there a place to open this, or is it just free for all? There we go. Okay. Modular power supplies are nice because you don't have to worry about all the mess that comes with a bunch of connectors that you don't need or may not need. This one's confusing me a little bit though. Oh, okay. So, you've never built a computer before, you're going to have at least 2 power connectors on the motherboard. So one is going to be down here. This is the old-fashioned one that everyone's seen forever. And then these are a little bit, I shouldn't say newer, I mean they've been around for 10 years. Your EPS connector, and that's just for additional power to the motherboard. So you're going to need at least those 2 things. Then there's your, your fans, your hard drives, your, CD burner. If you have a CD burner, we'll have a power cord for the CD burner. But in general, just plug everything you need in the power supply. Now, back in my day, power supplies used to have all of their cables just attached to them. And if you were like, well, I'm not using that cable, they'd be like, shut up, you use it. You just use it anyways. Put it somewhere. And you'd have to put it somewhere. But now we've got these nice modular cable systems where, this is going to get slightly unwieldy just because of both the small form factor and the fact that I kind of have a lot on the table. I'll move this case just a little bit. That should do it. So we've got that. So that's one connector down. And then, like I said, we need this other connector that, I don't even know if they're the same or just very similar looking to the PCI Express power connectors. but it's basically the same idea. I think they're different. I think they're actually a different plug. But oh yeah, like that's a PCIe end. So it says PCIe. That's SATA. I think this is my EPS. Yeah. So they call it CPU, and you'll know that it's come on, really? Yeah. It says CPU on the end of it, because if you don't plug that in and you try to turn it on, it will turn on, but not the CPU, which is confusing if you don't know why it's not turning on. And I think this end goes into the motherboard because it looks like it separates, and there used to be a 4-pin variant of this before the 8-pin variant of it. And so yeah, plug it into the power supply. Now we're almost ready to go, and we have one last thing that I'm going to, well, two. I'm going to have to get a keyboard, a mouse, but a graphics card. I know I said we're not using a graphics card, and we're not using a graphics card, but this is my old graphics card, or not my old one, my current graphics card for my hypervisor in my personal machine that I pulled out just to do a Linux operating system install on this box. And then once that's up, then we'll just get to it over the network, and we won't need a graphics card at all, freeing that up for more storage. So in order to do this, I should turn this so that you can see. So this is a PCI Express card slot, and you'll see it's got this little tang that moves back and forth. So we want that out so that this little tail here, you can see it there if I put my hand behind it, that little tail wants to sit in there, and it's going to kind of lock it in. So I'm going to push this down. I don't like how that sits though. Oh, that is wobbly. I mean, if you had it in a case, it wouldn't be a problem. It's only bothering me because it's not, you know, like, do I want to turn that on? I mean, I can hold it. I guess my hands aren't really doing anything else. I can hold it that way, and then I can turn it on, and then I can, I'm sure I'm making more of this than it is. Let me go get a USB mouse and keyboard. Alright, so we have a mouse and keyboard, and I do not have a monitor here, but what I do have is an HDMI capture device. So we are going to lose a camera, but gain something else. I'm going to gain a display, and I'm going to hope that I can navigate that display from my laptop in front of me, and grab a power cord for this power supply. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to move this case down and away so that you can see what's going on. Alright. I know I didn't put on the I/O shield. How am I ever going to know where the USB ports are, right? So, what I have now here is I've got the power supply. I'm going to show you one last time before I take the new camera away. So I've got the power supply, and it's just hooked up to the motherboard. We have a CPU, we have memory, and we have a graphics card. So in theory, at least, we should have a bootable system. So let's give that a shot. First thing I'm gonna, oh, you know what? I need an HDMI cable because the camera is mini, not regular. So give me 1 second. Alright, got me an HDMI cable. Say goodbye to the camera. Bye, camera. Like goodbye, camera, not like, you know, the camera can't make a decision on which team it plays on. That's a different kind of camera. I like that camera too, but different kind of camera. Okay. Just saying. Alright, before I trip all over this stuff, one thing I forgot to mention, power switches. So on a lot of motherboards, but not this motherboard, there is a button to turn it on right on the motherboard, which is super handy, especially if you don't have a case. But in this case, or lack of a case, we don't have that. So what I'm going to use instead is something a lot of people use, a piece of metal. So there are plugs on the motherboard, which I should have shown you on the other camera angle. I'm not going to tip it because I don't want to drop stuff. But there are pins that you plug in the switches from the front of the case. So the power button is one of those things. So it's 2 pins that go to the power button. And all the power button does is touch those 2 pins together to tell the computer to turn on. So that's what we're going to do here. I can't show it to you now, but trust me, they're there. It looks a lot like the pins that we looked at earlier. Except these fit a cable that goes to the front. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn on the power supply first. Okay, so power supply is on. I just saw there's some colored LEDs that are lighting up now. So I know that the board has power at the very least. I have my keyboard, and I may have to resize this HDMI input here, because otherwise it's going to look very funny. Or maybe just transition to my old scene here. I want to put myself in a corner where it's not going to, you know, transition. Watch me transition. Alright. So looking at this layout, it looks like if I touch these 2 wires here, I should turn the computer on. Boom! And I heard it. I know you can't see much right now, but in theory you should be about to see the graphics output of this thing, hopefully. First boots do tend to take a few extra seconds, so be aware of that. I thought a build of mine was completely done for, just because I was impatient and I wasn't waiting long enough. Oh wait, what happened to my audio? Am I still live? Let me double check. Okay, yeah, I just scrolled down, that's all. Cool. Check that out. That's a booting system. Can you see it? There. I can go through. I can look at my CPU information. I can look at all kinds of stuff. So let's take a look at a couple of things. One is capacity. So if I look over here, you see the capacity, 32 gigabytes. So that's good. Our memory is good. Our CPU, right? 3900 megahertz. Let's go and look at CPU information. Okay, so 3800, 8 cores. Another thing we want to look for, what else did we install, right? We installed storage. It's not going to be under there. NVMe configuration, Sabre and Rocket Q, those are the drives we installed, so that's good. That's cool, to see your temperatures. And remember, I was saying earlier about setting the fans so that they are nice and quiet. So on this motherboard, on a lot of motherboards, you can go in, and if you can manage to find it, you can set different curves for the fan, so you can tell it, this is when I want you to turn on and off. And Q fan. Yeah. So this does a lot of cool things. So you can see Q fan tuning. I don't think I'm going to do this now. It's 2 to 5 minutes. But it will actually figure out how slow the fan can spin. And it can also figure out how fast. Because if you set it at 0%, it will either not spin at all or it will spin at 20%. What you really want is for 5% to be 5% higher than the slowest speed. And then we can go in here and do, it's on auto. This is how it controls the speed. Fan profile. This is generally what you want. So silent is not always silent. What silent is it's going to try and be as quiet as possible. Turbo is it's going to try and keep the temperature as low as it can, even if that means spinning a little faster, being a little noisier. Manual is just, see, on a lot of boards, manual is just you set it at 80% and it stays there. On this one, you have an upper temperature, a middle temperature, and a lower temperature, and then you basically set the curve point. So that's cool. That Asus, or what's this? Asus? Yeah, Republic of Gamers is Asus. They do get a lot of credit for really good both fan control, pump control. You can see here all-in-one water pump control. You've got to set that based on different things. But they get a lot of credit for a good system for managing your lights, your fans, your all kinds of stuff. So we are coming up on 2 hours. This system boots, despite the fact that it is not yet in the cool case. I need to do a little more research on that, but I want to give you one last thing. We'll do the OS install, I think, assuming that goes well. And I had a USB cable somewhere here, so that I could do that. Give me 1 second. All right. So, yeah, don't bump it while it's running. Don't knock stuff off. So, I have my phone, and one of the nice features of this is If you root your phone, you can use something called Drive Droid and simulate a USB memory stick. So I have one here for Ubuntu, and we're going to use that as an installer. So what I'm going to do is, oh, I keep forgetting what cameras I do and don't have. So you can, yeah, you can't see that. Doesn't matter. You're going to open Drive Droid. You can do this with a regular USB stick, right? Turn it to turn an installer to a USB stick, or etch. There's Balena etcher. Actually, that's for something different. Win32 disk image is usually one of the things, or Rufus, or something like that. Somehow you're going to make a USB stick that can install an operating system, one way or the other. However you do that, it's cool, but that's the end goal that you're trying to accomplish. So I plugged that in. Now I'm going to go, I don't know that this is going to show up yet here. I don't think it is. You want to change your boot device to that device. You know what, it's fine. Well, hang on. Boot configuration. Fast boot, no boot. Well, where's the... I see, this is grayed out. Is it maybe because we haven't booted yet? Secure boot is state enabled. Secure boot is enabled. I don't want secure boot enabled. OS type. Other OS. I'll leave it enabled for now, but I don't have secure boot enabled on any of my machines. I don't remember if there's a good reason for that. There was some talk of Linux not being approved for secure boot, and Microsoft was going to take over the world. Oh, there we go. Ubuntu, only install, yeah. Ubuntu, safe graphics, Ubuntu. Yeah, so you can see it booted because it couldn't boot from anything else. It booted straight from the USB stick. Sometimes you'll have to press F2 or F12 or F10 to select a boot device. And if you have to do that, then do that. So I chose Ubuntu, just the first option there. And so it's going to load. That's weird. Why is it on the side like that? Oh, it must be in like a low graphics mode, but still outputting 1080p or 1080i. I think it's checking the installer. I think it actually says press something to skip, but I can't read it. I can go out, get out of studio mode, and I can probably read it better. Maybe I'll do that. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to say Control C and skip. No, I don't know if it's responding. It is Control C. Sometimes you will have issues with USB input devices due to legacy modes and things like that. What are you going to do? No, you're going to fix it. That's what you're going to do. So if you have problems with input devices, usually it's something along the lines of the operating system supports it, and the BIOS doesn't, or vice versa. So go into your BIOS, and usually you want to either enable or disable legacy USB support, and they'll usually take care of it. Sometimes you can also unplug the device and plug it back in, and all of a sudden the operating system will detect it. Basically punch buttons till it works. It's usually not an issue. Like you can see here, it came back for me already. Actually, I think it's just outputting at 720p and therefore is now this goofy size. I think I can fix that for you. Let's see. Let's see if I can make this more palatable. That's better, right? Yeah, whatever. That's better. We're going to do install Ubuntu. Oh, Jesus. I'm sorry. I'm using the mouse on my streaming machine to try and click on things on this other computer. Install Ubuntu. There we go. We're going to do English. I'm going to move this because I can't see past my own face. English US, English US. Yeah, why not? Actually, we don't have it in time. That's probably why not. I can also skip it. I mean, quite honestly, I'll probably do this again. This is mostly for demo. Normal, minimal. Honestly, I'm going to do minimal because we're not going to be. This isn't going to be a desktop machine. In fact, there is a server installer that you can use, but I'm used to this. So I'll do this and then treat it as a server. And you can remove whatever packages you want. Install third parties. No. For graphics, Wi-Fi. I'll play with this later. I may want the one for Wi-Fi, but not for graphics. And download updates, yes. We'll say yes. We're going to get to the hard part here in a minute. Erase disk and install Ubuntu. Advanced features. LVM. Logical volume management. You can do that for like disk encryption. You can also use ZFS if you want to use ZFS. We don't want to use ZFS. I'm going to hope that it's smart enough to do BTRFS. Oh no, it's not. It's going to do AST4. Okay, so we're not going to do that. We're going to do something else. Now we're going to continue. And I'm going to say this guy. Right? Do I have to do a new partition table? Probably. Yes, and then I believe I need a boot. Do I? No. Maybe not. This is a slightly goofy sub. Normally I would let this do its thing, but in this case I want ButterFS. Or ButterFS. And then the idea is, so I'm going to partition one of these drives, and then once it's booted, then I'm going to take this other drive and add it to this drive. But I don't need that drive yet. So for installing purposes, go back. I need to add an EFI system partition. See, I was right. I was right about being wrong. Something like that. Idiots. I don't know who, but they're out there somewhere. So new partition table. Continue. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make it, what should I make it? A gigabyte? Full gig? I usually see it at 512 megabytes. The Windows one is like 250 So use as EFI system partition 512 megs. That, I believe, is what has to store the bootloader and things like that so that the system can boot. Because it doesn't necessarily have the drivers for BetterFS. So, how do I explain this? When the computer boots, the computer can't read BetterFS. It needs to boot from a system partition that will have drivers and instructions on how to do that. And so that's why we need to have this EFI system partition, which used to be called the boot partition, which is probably still called the boot partition. Yeah, that's the idea. And then where we install the bootloader, that will be based on what drive you want to tell the computer to boot from, and then it will start the booting process. So in this case, we're going to have our first NVMe drive. So we got NVMe 0 and 1, NVMe 1 and 1. That's the second drive. So we're going to have the first drive have the bootloader on it, and that's going to handle the booting process. You don't need to, you don't want to. So that'll handle the booting process. Actually, I shouldn't say that. You could have two. You could have two. It's probably hairy and not worth doing. But we're going to click install now. If you continue, these changes will be written. It is written. Go for it. So now we're installing an operating system. We're in Chicago. This will probably be fast. There's Jeff. Computer's name. Call it Ghost. Because it's in the room, but you don't know it's there, right? Alright. Require my password and stuff. Yep. Almost finished copying files. God, I love Linux. This will go fast. These are some pretty fast drives. QLC SSDs have a downside, which is mainly write endurance. There's also write speeds to a certain extent, but if this were a drive where you were going to write a lot of stuff to it often, you might want to pick a different kind of drive. So these drives are a little bit cheaper, but the upside is that they so the QLC drives are cheaper, but the downside is that they will wear out faster in terms of if you were to use it for like a surveillance drive for recording from cameras, and you were constantly replacing that data, it's gonna fail sooner. And when it fails, it means you can't write to it anymore. You can still get your data off, but you can't write to it anymore. But in this case, the intended use for it is someone's going to put their data on it, and they're going to move it around a little bit and organize it. But then it's going to stay put, and it's going to be backed up somewhere else, and we'll probably be adding storage to it in the future. But that's why some of these decisions were made. So if you were sitting there thinking, you can't use QLC flash because it's bad and unreliable, and well, you're right for certain use cases. Yep. I would not recommend it for a database ever, but you know, for the job that it's going to be doing, it's better than a hard drive, and it's cost effective to where it isn't just plain stupid, like, you know, going out and buying a bunch of SLC drives. That would be cost prohibitive, and at that point I'd be recommending a hard drive instead, with RAID and redundancy, obviously. Man, this thing is not breaking a sweat at all. I mean, it shouldn't be. It's just copying file. The USB is more than likely the bottleneck here, which is the only reason we're still sitting here. It's because my phone is USB 2.0. Yeah, it's unpacking this from the drive. I mean, I can barely see it, but yeah. So yeah, so to kind of go over what the rest of the build would be, or what I'm likely going to do as soon as this is over and I can like relax and walk the dog and eat and whatnot. I'm probably going to just pop those heat spreaders off of the, because I mean they're not even heat sinks, right? Like they don't have fins on them. They're not doing that much in terms of cooling, and like don't take my word for it. Go look at people who have tested it and been like, well, you know, my memory could overclock this, you know, way farther if I just had these heat spreader. No, probably not. They look cool, especially if they've got RGB on them. In this case, they're probably going to come off. I still know that it's good memory in there. I'm probably going to run a little bit of a test on it to make sure, because I know I've taken these off and put them back on before. I can't remember if they're one piece or two, but yeah, we appear to be done installing our operating system, so that's cool. I hit restart, and then once it does its thing, I'm going to pull my phone, hit enter. And once I get SSH or a terminal server set up for this, then I can do all this over command line. It'll be a lot easier. So you can see it's Ubuntu. Their default is like 30 seconds, which I'm going to change to like 2, so that I don't have to like, the person who ends up using it doesn't have to wait for 30 seconds when they push the power button for no good reason. Let's get that. There you go. So we're running. She's all happy. Connect my online accounts. I'm not going to do that right now. Let's skip. Live patch. I'm not crazy about live patch. There's reasons for that I won't get into because this stream is almost over. Would you like to send the... No. Oh, I don't. Not to Canonical. I know I'm using Ubuntu here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best choice for all things. CNET.com. We're just going to make sure, hey, look at that, it works. It's a computer and it works. There you go. Sorry the memory and the fan and all that didn't quite fit just right. Actually, I don't know that it doesn't. But I know it wasn't going to fit in the case. I'll show you one last quick time the way the riser card thing works, because that's probably something a lot of people haven't seen before in most standard builds. So back to our case, and let me webcam only. So back to the case. We have two halves of it. The half that I have off right now is the half with the motherboard. So you've got these four little standoffs, right? And that's where your motherboard screws in, and then the ports stick out the back here. What happens on this side is that this cable, see this cable here? This cable plugs in to where we plug the graphics card in on the board, and then it bends around, and then that goes down to that port in the bottom there. Like I said, we're not going to have a graphics card for this machine, but we might use the 16x slot to put a bunch more of those NVMe SSDs in there, either to do RAID 5 for redundancy in case something fails, or just to expand the storage. So yeah, the motherboard goes in here, power supply gets screwed in here, and then yeah, there's like an SSD holder down here at the bottom. I don't know if you can see that way back. There you go. You gotta see that little bracket for a small SSD. Trying to think of what else I should go over before cutting out. RGB, I'm sure you saw the light strip. So the RGB, I think I'm going to 3D print some kind of a bracket to go in here so that I know it's not going to move or shift around. I don't really trust the glue strips. And then there's a small controller. Actually, I can show you that now. Set this back down so I don't scratch it. Most people have seen, you know, these kind of strip lights. And in fact, that motherboard has the ability to control the lights built into it. It doesn't actually need a separate controller. The problem, though, is I don't believe it. Well, number one, I don't believe it has a music reactive mode, and the remotes that come with these controllers are just easier for the end user, to be honest. So these, I thought these were going to be kind of isolated. Maybe not. So your typical, you know, RGB tape light. And then this little guy, and they make different ones, and they make ones that are Wi-Fi controlled and other stuff. But this little guy, you get just this little remote control, and then you've got your plug out for your RGB LEDs, a little IR receiver, and you just tuck this little box in somewhere, and it's got a microphone on it, so it'll be audio reactive, and it takes 12 volts, which you can pull off of your power supply. With those modular cables I showed you, you would cut into, you could either make an adapter, or you could just cut into one of those modular cables. I actually have like 2 spare boxes of those kind of cables, so that's probably what I'll do, and use that. So yeah, sorry we didn't get it into the box today. I may do another video where I kind of go over the box and how to install the server software and whatnot, but for now, that's it. Hope you had fun. Hope you learned something, and maybe you want to build your own something. If you do, let me know.